Have you ever looked around and realized that everything in your house had to be invented by someone? Like a couch? You know, when did someone realize that they wanted a chair but bigger? You never really stop and think about the everyday things in life that at some point were game changers. Well, the same thing is true about matches. Yeah, random, huh? Today, I mean, look, we've got lighters, so matches kind of seem like this old school thing and really unnecessary. I feel like today you only see matches in like a bowl at a trendy restaurant or by the toilet for, you know, those stinky situations. But we really never really use them. Well, back in the 1800s, matches were a huge deal. In the days before electricity, you needed matches to light your candles, your lamps, your stove, you know, so you could cook, your fireplace, I mean, everything. Many considered matches to be the most important item in the home. But ironically, the history of matches is dark. Making matches often led to slow, painful deaths, and workers who didn't die had to live with brutal, face-altering injuries for the rest of their lives. And it led to a legendary strike that changed workers' rights forever. So get out those matches you got from a steakhouse 3 years ago, light that fragrance-free candle, and get ready for the dark history of the Matchstick Girls. Hi friends, I hope you're having a wonderful day today. My name is Bailey Sarian and I'd like to welcome you to my podcast, Dark History. Here, we believe history does not have to be boring. It might be tragic, it sometimes is happy, but either way, it's our dark history. So all you have to do is sit back, relax, and let's talk about that hot, juicy history goss. Before we get into it, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'm always posting new content for you. And let me know what you think. I love hearing from you in the comment section. And then I read comments at the end. Now let's get into it. Great. So our story today starts in the mid-1800s in England. So Queen Victoria is on the throne and the elites are thriving. The fashion is giving Bridgerton. But that wasn't, that's not everyone. Around 80% of society was part of the working class and the underclass. For the working class, their whole life revolved around work in order to survive. And the underclass were usually impoverished and depended on the charity of others to get by. Now, if you were lucky enough to get a job, working conditions at this time were absolutely terrible. The Industrial Revolution was going strong, so there's like a ton of new machinery being used to mass produce things in factories. And that even means matches. And the factory we're talking about today was a match factory owned by two men, William Bryant and Francis May. Bryant and May were smart and knew they wanted to manufacture a product that people needed to buy, so they would always be profitable. In the 1850s, they started importing matches from Sweden. Originally, they were importing something called safety matches. Now, these matches were supposed to be safe because they didn't spark everywhere when you struck them like on the side of the box. So like Joan here, she has some matches. I suck at matches. Every time I try to light them, it never works out for me. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Are you trying to burn the place down? Anywho. So Bryant and May is raking in thousands of dollars selling the safety matches. So with this success, they decided to cut out the middlemen and make the matches themselves. Well, not themselves, but hire people to make the matches, So in 1861, Bryant and May, they took their profits and they purchased a patent on a special kind of match called the, quote, strike anywhere match. Which is exactly like what it sounds like. You can strike this match anywhere and it would light. Other matches, they didn't do this very well. So the guys, they knew that they had a bestseller on their hands. The common slang for these matches was called the, quote, Lucifer match, because in Latin, Lucifer means brightly shining one. Great. So once they secured their patent, they opened up a factory in London. Now, Bryant and May, they weren't the only businessmen to have a match factory in London. There were others around, but no one came even close to their success. Now, this is because their Strike Anywhere matches were coated in a chemical called white phosphorus. Now, people were aware like this chemical was not good for them. In the past, there were warnings on products that used phosphorus, telling people like, do not inhale when using this, pretty much. Toxic. But I guess in the past, when you would use a match, there would be some kind of like rotten egg smell. And the white phosphorus, it got rid of that smell. So people were willing to ignore like the warning of the phosphorus because they didn't like that smell, you know? It's literally like everything today. Everything is toxic for you, okay? Listen, everything, allegedly, is toxic for you. And it's like, we know it's bad for us, but we keep using it. Plastic water bottles, bad for us. Microplastics and everything, we don't care. It's like that, but with matches. So even though sales of these matches were doing very, very well, there, of course, were some shady things happening in the Bryant and May factory. You know, it's one of the best feelings ever. Saving money. Yeah, saving money you didn't even realize you were wasting. If I found out I was still paying $6.99 a month for a streaming service I only used once, I'll cancel that and feel good about my saving skills all week. I'm like, I gotcha. I found out about that streaming service thanks to Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. They make it so I can see all of my subscriptions in the same place. That way, if there's something I don't use, Rocket Money will help me cancel it right then and there. And their dashboard helps me track my spending. I can see what I spend compared to last month, so I know where's my money going, you know? Rocket Money will even help me create my own custom budget so I can hit my financial goals way easier. Plus, if you submit a picture of your bill, Rocket Money can try to negotiate a lower one for you. They can save you up to 20% and deal with all the customer service for you. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's features. Stop wasting your money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/darkhistory. That's rocketmoney.com/darkhistory. rocketmoney.com/darkhistory. By 1864, Francis May left the company after some disagreements on how the company was being run. He was eventually replaced by William Bryant's son. His son's name? Listen, Wilberforce. That's his name, Wilberforce. Yeah, let's take a beat there. Huh? Yeah, Wilberforce Bryant. Wilberforce. Yeah, I thought about it a lot. I don't know, superhero? What is that? What is that name? Where does it even come from? Wilberforce? I don't know. Anywho, so he brings in a son. So Wilberforce, he became the manager of the factory, and he was all about increasing profit, you know? And he was like, I don't really care about the workers. We just need more money. So at one point, he had about 5,000 people working for him. Now, these people, they were working 12 to 14-hour days, a minimum of 6 days a week. Most of the workers were women, teenage girls, and children. Some of these children were 6 years old. Matchmaking required workers to be on their feet all day. And the little money they did make, they would have to use to purchase their own tools and supplies in order to work in the factory. So this meant you had to buy your own string, your own glue, your own fuel. Yeah, the workers were allowed 2 breaks per day. And on these breaks, they were only allowed to eat or use the bathroom. That's it. If any rules were broken, they would be given a fine. And this company loved giving out fines. If you were a few minutes late, if you were talking to one of your coworkers, if you were going to the bathroom outside of an official break, if you had a messy workspace, you'd be slapped with a fine. So the workers were making such little money, a lot of them couldn't even afford shoes. So the only option they had was to work barefoot. So it's like, of course, their feet would get dirty, but then you would get a fine for that. You couldn't win. On top of all of that, these women and children were physically abused by the supervisors in the factory. They did this to stop them from like going to management and complaining about their work conditions. They would just like threaten them, you know, attack them, so they wouldn't talk. Bryant and May knew they could get away with this because these workers didn't have enough social power to put up much of a fight. They're like, what are you gonna do? Exactly, nothing. Like many factories at this time, Bryant and May hired their workers from lower class households. They were considered to be uneducated and looked down upon in the upper class. Now, to be fair, they didn't really have other options. This is also why they put up with all the abuse, because you either work and you get abused for pennies, or you be homeless on the street and like starve to death. So it's like, which one do you want? So many of the Bryant and May workers were Irish immigrants. And at the time, the Irish were being starved out of their own country. So many were like forced to immigrate to England in order to survive. So when they came to England, they were taking whatever job was available. Didn't matter how hard it was or how little they were being paid. It was better than nothing. There was tons of beef between Irish and English people. Many English people, a lot of them refused to even hire them. There were tons of negative stereotypes about Irish people. For example, it was said that the Irish like to drink and get into fights. This was a stereotype for the Irish men and women. So there was a description of the women who worked for Bryant and May at the time that said, quote, "They fight with their fists to settle their differences, not in the factory, for that is forbidden, but in the streets when they leave work in the evening. They fight like men and are not interfered with by police." So companies, they didn't want to hire them because they didn't want like this stereotypical drunk Irish person fighting in their factories. So if they got a job, they found a job, they usually kept the job, because it was hard to go anywhere else. What I'm getting at is they didn't have a lot of options. Most families were so poor, every single person in the household had to pitch in and get a job so they could get food on the table, make rent, stay alive, And as soon as like kids could walk, they were essentially like put to work. The kids would get like sometimes odd jobs in town, like working on farms or like at rich people's estates. But once the Industrial Revolution rolled around, a lot of kids even worked in factories. So conditions were dangerous and kids were coming home with some serious injuries, or they like wouldn't even come home at all. So the government like sent a group to investigate how these factories were treating children. Now, Bryant and May were known for employing kids. So of course, like these investigators, they went to take a look at their match factory. Rumor was going around that there were like several issues at the Bryant and May factory, especially when it came to like their child workers. I guess like kids were losing their fingers. They'd fall asleep near the machinery and like get badly injured. It was bad. So when the investigators go out to the factory, like I'm sure a lot of the workers were kind of relieved, hoping that, someone is gonna come in and stop these guys in charge from beating, fining, taking advantage of us and whatnot, Maybe these people are gonna save us and like have our backs. But that's not how it went. When the investigation was complete, they had found that everything at Bryant and May's factory was totally and completely fine. Everything was actually great. It was like super. They're like, wow, this is a great factory. We love this. They said it was, quote, a very nicely conducted place. I mean, it seemed like the factory investigators were paid off. I mean, Bryant and May, they had more than enough money to do so. But those are just allegations. Cannot confirm. But they wouldn't get away with it for long because Bryant and May's perfect reputation was about to start crumbling to the ground, just like everyone's jaws. Thank you. So in order to keep production moving, Wilberforce, that name, the guy in charge with the name, great. He stopped caring about any and all safety protocols in the factory. So he felt like he was honestly like above the law. And the investigation, to him, it really proved that. He's like, see, I'm amazing. I could do whatever I want. So he didn't really think that there was anything wrong with, maybe like fudging the safety protocols a bit to save money, cut corners. I don't know. But then his workers started getting sick one by one. Listen, remember the white phosphorus? Well, it turned out to be more than just a little toxic. Do you ever feel like you keep getting stuck in the same routine? I definitely do. And then I go looking for a way to escape reality. But there's nothing really doing it for me these days, And then I found romance audiobooks on the Dipsea app. If you don't know, Dipsea is the app for spicy audiobooks that was created by women for women. Oh, they've got over 1,000 audiobooks to choose from, all of them written by professional writers and read by very talented narrators. Dipsea makes multitasking a little bit more fun, because it's like, it might look like I'm just cleaning, but actually, I'm listening to a sexy professor or like a Scottish sailor whispering and telling me a hot little steamy story in my ear the whole time. They have so many different characters and genres, you're bound to find something or someone that you like. You can search on their app for fae, royalty, lesbian cowboys, and everything in between. I mean, when you say lesbian cowgirls, Bailey, yeah, there's something for everyone, okay? And I mean everyone. I know, Joan girl, she is getting wet. She's getting wild over here. She got Dipsea last week. Woo, she won't shut up about sleepover in the underworld. That's the one she's into right now. And I'm not judging. I love that for you. For listeners of the show, Dipsea is offering an extended 30-day free trial when you go to dipseastories.com/darkhistory. That's 30 days of full access for free when you go to Dipsea, DIPSEA, stories.com/darkhistory. Dipseastories.com/darkhistory. So in the factory, all of the women and children were constantly exposed to white phosphorus. That's because on the ground floor of the factory, there were 300 machines dipping tips of wooden matchsticks into trays of this chemical. So there would be like chemical fumes coming from the machines, And it was said that these fumes were very, very strong and like would fill the entire factory. So the women and children, they didn't get masks or gloves when working around these fumes. I mean, why would they? On top of that, the workers would be forced to take their food breaks inside of the factory. So they'd go from like working on these machines, touching the chemicals all day, to then like sitting down with chemicals on your hands, eating your food. And then when you weren't doing that, you were breathing in the fumes all day. And like you couldn't escape it if you worked in this factory. And they didn't really have a choice, and they honestly didn't know exactly like how toxic it was. It actually took a while for the side effects to take over the body. But like after a little while, something not even strange, it was like real bad. It started to like happen to many of the workers. Something was going on. I guess workers were feeling super nauseous to the point of like vomiting everywhere. It was actually said that the workers would leave a trail of vomit on their way home every night. Like that's how sick they were. They would just like vomit all the way home. They also were experiencing intense diarrhea at the same time. So it was just coming out both ends. Not ideal. And they're suffering. So vomiting, diarrhea, not great. And then not long after that, workers seemed to be getting these like horrible, super painful toothaches. Now, at first, they just kind of ignored it, thinking like it was just a coincidence. Like maybe from vomiting so much, they were getting a toothache. Maybe they just needed to brush more. I don't know, Oral hygiene like wasn't a big priority in England at the time. So they just kind of, it'll work itself out. But then the toothache would spread to their jawline. Then abscesses would form inside of their mouths, and this would make the pain unbearable. So they'd be getting this pain, ouch. Then their teeth would start to loosen and then just like fall out. It was like a horror film. So over the next few months, one or both sides of their jaw would swell to the point where it was like almost impossible to chew food. Now listen, we're about to get graphic here, okay? So all these things are happening. Diarrhea, vomit, toothache, jaw, swelling, huh? Yes. Then these weird bumps would form on the bottom of their jaws, like down here, you know? So these bumps would like fill with pus. Listen, the bumps would eventually burst and the pus would leak out of their faces, leaving like gaping holes behind. So over the course of a few months, the flesh and bones around their jaws would just start to rot. Their jaws would start to crumble and slowly, piece by piece, just fall off their faces. Yes, their jaw would fall off their faces. Now it sounds fake, but it's not, okay? Most of the time, like, the wounds were so severe that the workers would suffer from like horrible infections. And this was decades before antibiotics were a thing. So a lot of the time they just didn't survive past the point of their jaw falling off. Now, if you got lucky and you did survive, it didn't get any better because this mysterious disease would then spread to the brain. In best case scenario, they would be left with permanent brain damage, all for matches. So it started to become clear to the workers that this wasn't a coincidence. They were kind of putting two and two together, and they were believing that they were becoming ill because of this chemical that they were working with. I mean, they were inhaling this chemical all day, every day, and it entered, you know, in their body through their airways, again, eating, they're touching, it's just around them all the time. So the workers who weren't sick yet, they were either in denial that it would happen to them, or they were just completely terrified that, you know, they were going to be next. But what were they going to do? You know, quit? Let their families starve? I know it sounds silly because to you and I, we're like, yeah, quit, find another job. But literally it was like, this was it for like, this was like their only option. So what were they going to do? As time goes on, more and more workers were getting sick, and I guess it would actually take around 2 to 5 years to develop symptoms after being exposed to phosphorus. So it was like it would slowly creep up on you. Now, sadly, there isn't a number out there, like an exact number of how many workers suffered with this disease, because nobody was recording how many cases were happening. The company, Bryant and May, they're like, no, we're not going to be reporting this. They don't want people to know. But as more and more people got sick, Bryant and May started to get a bit of a reputation. I mean, their workers were walking home barfing each night, and people were kind of taking notice. So Bryant said, quote, "We had one case, I think, of a child, and I think there was one of a young woman, although I forget whether we had two. But they had worked in small places before they came to us. The disease was not contracted in our factories at all." I mean, they were just straight up lying, you know? Meanwhile, workers were complaining about jaw pain so much that the company had to create a policy to deal with it. So the factory, they had offered the sick workers like less than $1 to stay home. This was supposed to be some kind of like olive branch to help support them while they recovered. But usually they never recovered. I mean, workers had years of toxic chemical exposure by the time the toothache started. And by that point, it was too late. So if you went on this like sick leave situation, after a few months, Bryant and May, they just stopped paying the women. You know, they're like, you're on your own, whatever. So many of the workers who got the dreaded toothache, they tried their best to hide it from the supervisors. The jaw pain continued, and as the bone in their jaws started to rot away, then like even weirder symptoms started. Now apparently there was a phosphorescent glow coming from within their body. You know how I can tell it's almost the holidays? No, not the calendar. You know, I'm doing my normal online shopping and every site is telling me what date I need to order like stuff by if I expect to get the stuff in time for Christmas. Big stores are already prepping for the chaos of the holidays, so small business owners should too. too. And that's why I love ShipStation. ShipStation is there to help when your business has outgrown your old shipping solutions, to help you go from hectic to efficient with an all-in-one order fulfillment system. That system integrates with over 180 of the most popular e-commerce platforms, marketplaces, and carriers. And their system makes everything so easy. I love that all of your orders and tasks show up on one simple dashboard. That way, you can make sure everything on your to-do list gets done. ShipStation is the fastest, most affordable way to ship products to your customers with discounts up to 89% off UPS, DHL Express, and USPS rates. So it's easy and a great deal. My two favorite things. Scale your e-commerce business with the shipping software that delivers. Switch to ShipStation today. Go to ShipStation.com and use code DARKHISTORY to sign up for your free 60-day trial. That's ShipStation.com, code DARKHISTORY. The human body can do a lot of weird things, but I think we can all agree that glowing in the dark shouldn't be one of them. You know? Now, we actually did a dark history episode on the radium girls, do you remember? Where like something similar happened. Women were exposed to like a toxic chemical and it caused them to literally glow green in the dark. It was horrifying. So same thing. These people, these women, children, they're all glowing. This is when the disease became known as Fossy Jaw. Honestly, when I heard Fossy Jaw for the first time, it kind of sounded like it was the name of a dance. Like, do the Fossy Jaw, do the Fossy Jaw, like something like that, right? It sounded kind of cute. And then when I first like was researching for this episode, and then I looked up pictures and I was like, oh, that is not a dance. That is not a dance, Bailey. On top of everything, it was said that these women also like had a horrible smell to them. And I guess it like smelled kind of garlicky. So you have that garlicky smell, and then also you have the smell of like the flesh rotting from their faces. It was awful, awful, awful. And the only way to treat this like mysterious disease, at the time, they believed that giving the women mouthwashes would help and like treat the infection before it spread. But it never worked, you know, it didn't work. The only way to address it was to get surgery to remove the rotting jawbone. Now, this wasn't common because most people couldn't afford to see a doctor or get surgery. So getting Fossy Jaw was pretty much just, you were getting a death sentence. Now, the workers at Bryant and May, they were not the only ones getting Fossy Jaw. Because of the success of the Bryant and May Lucifer matches, eventually other factories, like over in America, started to use white phosphorus for their matches. And this led to several workers coming down with Fossy Jaw as well. Now, one girl who had to deal with this was a 16-year-old girl named Cornelia. And she worked in a match factory in New York for like over 2 years. Then she started coming down with the symptoms of Fossy Jaw. She got a toothache, and then her jaw started to swell, and they had extracted her tooth, but her jaw kept swelling. It got bigger and bigger, and then like a hole had formed in the flesh under her jaw. Now at that point, her jaw started to leak pus, and during all that, she tried to power through it. I know, she kept showing up for shifts at the factory because she didn't want to lose her job. I know, like whenever I get cramps, I'm like, I'm out, I can't do it. And then it's like you hear stories like this and you're like, oh shit, I suck. It's wild what they put up with back then. But finally for Cornelia, it got so bad that she had to be rushed to the hospital, and doctors, they had no choice but to remove her lower jaw. But listen, this was the 1800s, so they didn't have this cute little IV drip to help her like drift off to sleep with some morphine and then remove her jaw. No. She was awake the whole time. They bring out some kind of chainsaw-like device and they remove her jaw. Now, Cornelia, she would go on to survive this insane surgery. I don't know how she did it, because she didn't get any pain medicine, anything. That's raw dogging it, okay? Now, on top of that, she ended up having to have another surgery on the other side of her jaw because that side became infected. Both sides of her jaw are gone, okay? And apparently, afterwards, she was still able to talk and eat, so it was considered a success. Cornelia's story gets shared with the press because the doctors kind of want to like brag what they did because they're proud of it. So when it goes out to the press, they have these graphic illustrations of her surgery and phossy jaw. And this is like when it started to put the disease on the map for the general public. So for the first time, people are like seeing what is going on. I mean, none of this is ideal, but Cornelia was a best case scenario. And her case might have given some people with phossy jaw some hope. I mean, we don't know, but like maybe. If anything, it just kind of made people aware of the situation. Step 1, make people aware. Step 2, address the situation, you know? Still, at this point, there was a big question mark over the cause of the whole thing. Like, how could Bryant and May not see this coming? Now, it's been documented that Bryant and May were actually fully aware that white phosphorus gave workers phossy jaw, and they just ignored. They looked the other way. They're like, what? That's crazy. We didn't know. What? Ugh, that's nuts. That's so crazy. Whoa. On top of that, here's what they knew that really is not okay, because there was actually a safer alternative out there. Instead of using white phosphorus, they could have been using something called red phosphorus, and this could have been used on their matches the whole time, and it wouldn't allegedly cause phossy jaw. But the company, they refused to use it because it was a little bit more expensive, and you know, that would cut into their profits, and they didn't want to do that. They need to buy more cigars and suits. Well, once this whole like phossy jaw thing came out, the reputation of Bryant and May's factory started to go like down the toilet. I mean, people would just ask the girls on the street with phossy jaw where they worked, and they'd be like, Bryant and May. So things are not looking good for the factory, right? And the guys know it. So Bryant, he's still in charge. He's like, how can we do some like damage control here, you know? Like, we need better PR. So he comes up with a foolproof plan. So as soon as workers would complain about tooth pain or even look like they were in pain, they would take that worker by the hand, lead them to another part of the factory, grab a scary tool, and then forcibly yank out their teeth. Which you think they would have known by now that like yanking out the tooth wasn't going to solve the problem, but they still did it anyways. And like if anyone refused to go along with this little plan, I guess they were fired. In the 1880s, the company grew more and more successful. They were making a ton of money, and you know, this was split happily amongst the heads of the company. So this had been going on for decades at Bryant and May. Now, meanwhile, again, it's the 1880s, there were actually groups starting to form outside of the company to protect workers from evil companies taking advantage of their workers. So one of these groups was called the Fabian Society. Now, the Fabian Society was a political group in England, and they believed in helping the everyday person through labor reform. Essentially, they were bringing like awareness to issues within factories. So the Fabian Society got word about what was going on at Bryant and May. So a member of the society, her name was Annie Besant, decided to meet with some of the women from the factory. So she meets with them, she interviews them, and she was horrified by what she was hearing, like how they were being treated. She's like, I can't believe this. So Annie, she writes an expose, and she titles it White Slavery in London. I mean, to be fair, these women were allowed to go home and have personal lives unlike actual enslaved people, but you know, I get what she was going for here. So Annie wrote this shocking headline to bring attention to the girls suffering, and she did not hold back. Within her article, she talked about like the inhumane factory conditions, the abuse, the low wages, the danger they were facing every single day, the fines. Oh, and I don't know, the fucking chemicals eating their face alive. She then goes on to describe like the huge difference between the lives of the rich factory owners and their workers, saying, quote, born in slums, driven to work while still children, undersized because underfed, oppressed because helpless, flung aside as soon as worked out. Who cares if they die or go onto the streets? But Annie knew like her article, it really would only go so far. Lots of factories at this time had terrible working conditions. So really, all she could do was like call for a boycott of Bryant and May. Now, when the public read this, they actually rallied behind the factory workers, and they kind of gave them a title. They started calling them the Match Girls. I don't know about you guys, but I really thought I'd like have my skin routine figured out by now, you know? But my skin is always changing, so I find myself switching things up a lot. One week I'm worried about the breakouts, then the next week, oh, my skin is so freaking dry. Oh my gosh, it's like pick one. Pick a lane, skin. Pick a lane. But that's why I'm so glad I have Apostrophe, the sponsor of this episode. I've been using Apostrophe for years. Okay, listen, you need to get on this because listen, Apostrophe is an online platform and they connect you with your very own expert dermatology team. They create a customized treatment for your skin and like whatever your skin concerns are. Okay, so like for me, stress breakouts, dark spots because I'm a picker, so I leave dark spots, and then hydration because my skin is so dry. But you go onto their website, you tell them all this, and then they're gonna like pick out the products for you. Okay, you can even get access to prescription treatments that I used to have to go to my dermatologist for that I can now get on Apostrophe. Yes, and it's all delivered right to your door. All you have to do is fill out an online consultation about like what your skin goals are and your medical history. Then you attach a couple of selfies to show your skin and the concerns. There is no in-person doctor's appointment required. Apostrophe wants everyone to feel confident in their skin no matter what problems or concerns or whatever you're dealing with. Apostrophe is here to help you love the skin you're in. And they make it so easy. Right now, we have a special deal for our audience. You can get your first visit for only $5. Oh yes, at apostrophe.com/darkhistory when you use our code DARKHISTORY. Now listen, that's a savings of $15, and this code is only available to our listeners. So to get started, you just go to apostrophe.com/darkhistory and then click Get Started. Then use our code DARKHISTORY at sign up and you'll get your first visit for only $5. A big thank you to Apostrophe for sponsoring today's episode. Now let's get into the story. Hi. The public started demanding explanations from Bryant and May. Now, instead of these guys like, I don't know, taking the hint and making safer working conditions for the women and children or switching to the safer red phosphorus, Bryant and May decided to strike back at the writer, Annie. So they claimed that her article was full of lies and they even threatened to sue her. They even forced their workers to sign a letter saying that everything in that article was made up. Now, if they didn't sign the letter, they'd be fired. The Bryant and May workers saw the support from the public and it gave them that security and confidence boost they needed to be able and take a stand against Bryant and May. Now, one of the workers, her name was Sarah Chapman, she refused to sign the letter. Now, it was said that like she was immediately fired, but she wasn't gonna let Bryant and May win. When she left, she convinced 14 other match girls to go with her and strike. On July 5th, 1888, the Bryant and May workers went on strike, and this became known as the Match Girls Strike. As the strike began, people started donating to a fund to support the Match Girls. So they go on strike, right? And like a big majority of their workers are on strike. So Bryant and May was forced to halt production and take a loss on profits. But they were still refusing to acknowledge the suffering that the Match Girls had endured. So the Match Girls went to Parliament, the government, to testify about their experiences in the factory. Now, this was a very big deal at the time. Factory workers didn't just walk into government buildings, period. Okay, you just didn't do it. And the press was also taking notice. 2 local papers covered the strike, which meant that the public was like keeping track of everything that was happening. And the public, anyone reading the newspapers or whatever, they were 100% on their side and agreed that they deserved better. So the women, they go and they testify, and some members of the government were so moved that they even offered their personal support to the women through donations. It was really exciting to hold these guys accountable and have like the support of the public and even the government, you know? But at the end of the day, I think these women knew deep down that they were replaceable, and they were terrified that they'd never get their jobs back or even work at all, you know? Because if you went to another job and they were like, maybe they were against the strike, they'd be like, you were part of that strike, I'm not gonna hire you, you know? Plus, who's gonna wanna hire you when you're missing half of your face? Like, it made things really rough, you know? But Brian and May, they were not budging. And these women decided they needed to organize. So the Match Girls created a strike committee. The original worker who started the walkout, Sarah Chapman, led the charge along with 2 other women from the factory. So they're feeling confident from all their support, and the strike committee agreed to sit down with representatives from Bryant and May to negotiate. So they had a list of demands. They asked the company to give their workers a raise and a room to actually take their lunch so they didn't have to eat on the floor next to all the toxic chemicals. They also asked the company to stop issuing fines, to provide tools for workers, and most importantly, give the strikers their jobs back. I know, they're not even asking about like fixing their jaws or anything, which is pretty wild. They could have asked for a lot more, but good for them. The Match Girls wanted to create a union so conditions would like never get this bad again. And you know, the public did not like Bryant and May, and after that, they really didn't have a choice. They kind of needed to agree in order to get back into making money. So after only a few weeks, they agreed to improve conditions, increase pay, and stop fining their workers. You could say it's a win, but what about the chemicals? Okay, whatever, Bailey. Just like be happy. They got to win. Like this is pretty major. Like striking against a big company is huge. This was like a huge success for the women. I'm like, God damn it, ask for more. Murder the guys. I'm a little extreme. Don't be on my team. But they were like confident Brian and May. They weren't gonna like backslide. So they agreed to these new terms, and not long after negotiations, they got back to work. But this time they were unionized, and it was called the Union of Women Matchmakers. Eventually, the union expanded to include male workers, and they renamed themselves the Matchmakers Union. So their victory against the factory owners wasn't just for matchmakers in London. These match girls had a huge effect on other workers trapped in terrible factory jobs. So people kind of like took notice of the strike, the negotiations, and everything. And soon more and more strikes started happening across London. Gas workers, dock workers, everyone was ready to fight for better treatment. So like, it was great, right? Great, yeah. Love that. Except there was one big problem. None of the agreements actually did anything about white phosphorus. So the company was supposed to change the factory's working conditions so the women would stop getting phossy jaw, but they didn't. In the years after the strike, more than 16 women died from phossy jaw, and those are just the ones that we know of, okay? Because most phossy jaw cases were never recorded. Some people say it was around 11% of workers got phossy jaw. Others say it was hundreds. But most people agree there's no way to know like how many people were affected because these cases were not recorded. So yeah, I can imagine it was a lot more because everyone was around that gnarly ass like chemical. Oh God. Eventually in 1893, the government stepped in. Now, the factories needed to be certified by an outside organization and prove that they offered better ventilation and sanitation. So Bryant and May kept using white phosphorus until 1900. So they were told to stop, but they continued to use it for over 10 years. I mean, they put thousands of people's lives on the line, and the only consequence they faced was a small fine. Now, the only reason that they stopped using phosphorus was because there was a new, cheaper match chemical that didn't get in the way of them making a profit. So not because of the workers or because they cared, because it was cheaper. They're like, more money for me. And finally, after almost 50 years, the Fossey Jaw, it stopped. Whew, that was fucking rough. The match girls put up with years of terrible treatment at the hands of Bryant and May. Their strike might have not fixed everything, but it did change a lot. Young women were able to, for one of the first times, fight back. They were considered unskilled, poor, and replaceable by the men who made money off of their labor. But when they joined together, they were all on the same team. They changed the lives of tens of thousands of factory workers. Even though the match girls didn't get everything they were fighting for, their strike inspired decades of workers to unionize and fight for their rights. I guess the lesson here is to work together and take down these bozos in charge, huh? Because listen, today, when you think about it, yeah, we're not getting Fossey Jaw like they were back then. But still today, these large corporations are still taking advantage of everyone, huh? And if you threaten to say anything, they'll fire you. This is still a common thing. They'll pay off people, they'll hide whistleblowers. So if we can all just work together and we can really take down these companies, we could do some damage and get better working conditions. I'm mainly thinking about you know what I'm saying? Or I could just, yeah. So I guess the takeaway here is to never give up. Sadly, it's not the first time here on Dark History where we've talked about a large company or corporation taking advantage of workers. Remember the Triangle Shirtwaist fire? What was it called? I don't forget. That was episode 1. But it was kind of the same thing. They were abusing their workers and then shit did not go well. But it's we always have to wait until something tragic happens in order to get change, when really if we just all could work together and demand change before a tragedy strikes, that is the goal here in my mind. In my perfect world, we'd all be really on the same page, working together and demanding that these corporations take better care of us as the workers, right? But yeah, I mean, who knows if that, I just feel these stories just keep happening and it sucks. I don't know. How do I end this? It sucks. Fossey Jaw, don't look at the pictures if you're listening to this on the podcast. It's rough, okay? It must have been pure hell. Oh my God. Well, speaking of hell, Thanksgiving, huh? It's happening. And you know what happens around Thanksgiving? Millions of us are usually traveling. Yeah, I don't like traveling, okay? But listen, I'm sure you can agree, traveling really sucks now. You have to pay too much. You have to find a ride to the airport, right? And then the airport treats you like a major inconvenience. And then the plane, for me, I'm terrified. I don't like flying. It gives me great anxiety. And you're just praying, I hope everything goes fine. It's expensive. Ugh, deep breath. But it got me wishing that I lived in the quote unquote glory days of air travel. I mean, I would see pictures of back in the olden days where people would be flying and it looked luxurious and cool, and people were eating lobster and having champagnes and smoking cigarettes. And it's what happened to that? What happened to that? Because look at where we are now. What happened? But naturally, when I start questioning things, I'm there you go. This is going to be a Dark History episode. So join me next week to discuss the dark history of air travel. It's actually really fun. At first I was is there a story here? But then when I was really looking into it, there is a really interesting story about air travel. Oh, it's been such a journey. It's wild. So I hope to see you next week. Well, friends, thank you for hanging out with me today. Did you know you can join me over on my YouTube where you can watch these episodes on Thursday after the podcast airs? And while you're there, you can also catch my murder, mystery, and makeup. That's on Mondays. And also, don't forget to subscribe because I'm always here for you with new content. Also, I'd love to hear you guys' reactions to today's story, so make sure to leave a comment down below, see what you guys are saying, and maybe your comment will be featured in a future episode. Now, let's read a couple of comments you guys have left me. At ExoChit the Princess, I think that's your username, left me a comment yelling, "Bailey, I left for like a year. 7 million? It's a party up in here." Beep, beep. Yeah, 7 million. I know, isn't that crazy? No, dude, when I started YouTube, this was back in like 2013, I never in a million years thought I would have more than like 1,000 subscribers. So to me, when I see that number growing, I'm like, what in the world is going on? Like, it's nuts. It's nuts. And, but thank you. It's exciting, I think. I try not to think about it because that's kind of a lot of people. It's a lot of eyeballs, but I appreciate everyone's support. And I'm glad that I, you know, people want to hang out. That's great. Thanks for coming back, though. Where'd you go for that year? You okay? Okay. Nini Bell 74881 left a comment on our Dark History of Death episode saying, "I told my kids to cremate me and bury me underneath a crab apple tree so I can be fruitful and multiply, still like the Bible says, and still be crabby. LOL. My final joke. LOL." Nini. Nini, I kind of like that. That's not a bad idea, honestly. I like that. Good for you. Make your demands. All right. I hope that works out for you and they make that come true. I still want to be put in a firework. I think that is just the best. Right? No. Okay. Rin Klim left us an episode suggestion. Please do a dark history on Marion Stokes. She recorded literally 35 years straight of news in the belief of access to knowledge. Oh, wasn't this a documentary? I believe I watched this. Very interesting story, and I think definitely I'm writing it down. Thank you for the suggestion, and I will I'll start Googling around, see what I come across. Well, I appreciate you guys so much for hanging out with me today and watching, and don't forget to leave a comment because maybe you'll be featured in a future episode. And hey, if you don't know, Dark History is an Audio Boom original. A special thank you to our expert, Susan Campbell Bartoletti, author of Kids on Strike and How Women Won the Vote. And I'm your host, Bailey Sarian. I hope you have a good day, you make good choices, and you be safe out there. I'll be talking to you guys later. Bye.